third presenter is Huan Yu Qiang, Doctor, Taipei City Hospital. He has a great experience in handling this COVID-19 pandemic. His presentation topic is Pandemic Aftermath Trends of International Health Cooperation. And Yu He-jae, Director of ORP Institute, will discuss this presentation.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm very glad to share my experience and a viewpoint on behalf of Taiwan with Korean academic circles. Okay, my title as this series of speech is the means of the international cooperation in the post-pandemic era. Some may argue that the COVID-19 has breached the people's trust in the globalization. However, pandemic as an essential stage of the globalization to pass through. In a sense, it is impossible for countries throughout the world to hold their economic actions, which may lead to nationwide trust crisis, facing a reduction in medical, educational, occupational patients, and the citizens' mistrust in the government. So the core of the trends of international health cooperation is to find a way to bring back the trust. This is part of my core of the speech. My name is Jiang Guanyu, medical doctor, and I see in the Taipei City Hospital, and I'm an attending physician hospitalist in my specialty. And I'm also a deputy chief executive in GTMA, a Global Taiwan Medical Alliance. And I also under the master degree of the Global Health and Development in Taipei Medical University. First of all, I will share about the critical success factor dealing with the crisis. The three factors should be recognizing the crisis, managing the crisis, and the communication about the crisis with the public. Okay, first, recognizing the crisis, including how to build the top-down system. We were notified of the cases in China, so we activated the CECC, the Center Epidemic Command Center, and then the top-down managing. We do the border control, the case identification, and the containment policy. Due to the successful, efficient, and effective policy, we have the less pressure on resource allocation. But I think the most important is the communication. It is very important to reassure and educate the public while facing and fighting the misinformation during epidemic. I can share my research in master degree program in global health is that how to evaluate the capability for the public to face the epidemic. It is so-called KAP. K is the knowledge of the public. A is the attitude. The public will take it serious or not. And the P is the practice. All the policies, containment of the infectious disease, take effect or not under the country's socio-economic background. For example, social distancing would be effective in India. Low socio-economic status tends to live in group within limited spaces. It's the aspect of the India. As I'm the hospitalist, I focus on the administrative process in hospital. So I can share our policy of the preliminary triage in Taiwan. As the picture we show, this page. After community-based surveillance, in the left part of the picture, those who was diagnosed and highly suspected waiting for being diagnosed will be isolated in an expanded screening ward as the community hospital admission. And those who were confirmed will be sent to well-trained facility as the referral system. It is so-called island hopping system strategy in Taiwan. And this picture is the statistics during SARS in 2003. We can see there's a limited overseas confirmed cases, but within 3 weeks, because we don't have a referral system and a tryout at that time. So you can see there's a surge following by the overseas cases. There are domestic cases happen at that time. It's a really big tragedy. Following so many years, now we cope with the COVID-19. We can see in this picture, there's some surge of the overseas confirmed cases. However, it didn't bring any surge of the domestic cases. So under the referral system, we improved our policy and educate the people about the hygiene behavior. So I think all this experience is very important, and then we can share it to the Korean, and maybe Korea has the same policy as Taiwan. All said above is just the responding in Taiwan, might similar to Korea. However, to reverse the economic disaster of the COVID-19 pandemic, the next step after this surge of the epidemic is that we have to set a new normal, preparing for returning to school, returning to work, and returning to travel. In the picture of Asia Pacific, the cross-border policy as immunity passport following with travel bubble should be mentioned. I will mention the conception of AAR, the After Action Review, then is what to promote between nations. As to immunity passport, there are pros and cons. It consists of a lot of serological tests and combined with the technology like the blockchain. But there are some experts that oppose it. Let's say that a national immunization certification program will require hundreds of millions of serological tests. It is unfeasible. For example, Germany has the population of nearly 84 million people, so will require at least 168 million serological tests to validate every resident COVID-19 immune status at least twice. 2 tests per person are the minimum, because anyone who tests negative might later become infected and will need to be retested to be immune certified. Repeat testing on no less than an annual basis would be necessary to ensure ongoing immunity. Even if immunity passports were limited to healthcare workers, the number of tests required could still be unfeasible. Even South Korea, a country with high testing rate, had managed to test only 1.5% its population by May 20th. And this picture is about our experience of inspection quantity. Our case volume should be no more than 4,000 cases per day. It's our background information, it's our limitation. Our well-performed just rely on strict containment for 14 days isolation, no matter where traveler came from. So you can see this picture. The blue one is the certifiable cases reported. The red one is the home quarantine surveillance, and the yellow is the expanded screening surveillance. If our test volume is more than equipped laboratory limitation, what consequence will it be? As to laboratory equipped in Taiwan was limited, only 4,000 cases could be tolerated. Therefore, strict home quarantine policy is superior to screening. To build an immunity passport will be controversial in Taiwan. We need more laboratory construction and professional personnel in the future. Following by the policies of travel bubble, there are some countries have the implemented region, like the New Zealand and Australia, like Vietnam and Thailand, and some European countries like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And there are some domestic travel bubble in a wider border countries like Canada. Will it be the long-term solution? Probably not, but I think it's a good beginning. As we are countries fighting COVID-19 successfully, we can closely discuss more about the possible traveling bubbles. This picture is published on Nature Human Behavior journal. It's about the social network-based distancing strategies to flatten the curve in the post-lockdown world. If we limit it, you can see, if we limit it or restrict the number of the nodes containing our point, we can let the infectious disease less contagious. We can reopen, increasing the contact points per node step by step. When there is the evidence, we crash the curve. The final part is what I want to advocate most between nations. It's so-called AAR, the After Action Review. After a challenging task, most of us take a moment to reflect on our actions, focusing on what worked or what didn't, and what we can do better next time. We call this After Action Review when it comes to managing emergencies and disasters that affect the health of communities. After Action Review helps us to better prepare for and respond to similar emergencies in the future. AR should be conducted in an open and honest spirit to allow experience sharing and cross-learning among participants. But what is the AR detail? This picture is about AR definition from the WHO's guideline. You can see the AR will take place after the declaration of the end of the public health emergency or outbreak. It will take place within 3 months. Left of the picture is the responding among the countries. So the right side is how we make the solution to facing the similar problem in future. Here's the AR planning roadmap. There are 5 steps for preparing the AR. The pre-AR period, there are the design and the prepare. To design the question you want to interview, to build the AR team, who is the interviewer and who is the candidate, the so-called stakeholder, and then finally you should develop the checklist. And to prepare, you have to prepare all the relevant background information as you can. And then on the face of the AR discussion, when you conduct an AR discussion, who is the leadership? Who is the facilitator? Who is the recorder? And the most important is that you should build a consensus during the AR discussion. And finally, post-AR period, there are the result and the follow-up. The one who record all of it should debrief the summary and be documented it. And then you should follow up the consequence, the conclusion of the discussion, and then to take its action. The AR is a discussion tool, and the WHO has made it as a guideline. However, WHO has its situation. It has a particular issue, violating the spirit of being honest and open. Therefore, I advocate we can build the AR outside WHO to achieve the goal of the AR, like objective observation, analyze the gap, find the best practices and contributing factors, and identify the area for improvement. I advocate the AR outside WHO to build the AR team between the nations and the countries in Pacific Asia. In the final page, it is the novel described the patient suffered during MERS in Korea. I introduced this book in Taiwan during epidemic. The case in this story didn't suffer from the MERS itself, but poor policy during MERS. Do we know pandemic or public health disaster better enough now? Maybe better. but I don't know if it is enough or not. What's the need in a new normal after COVID-19? We need more discussion between nations and the countries. Thanks for your listening.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. It was very interesting and meaningful. I am Hee Jae-yu from Korea, and I'd like to share my opinion and some questions for you. COVID-19 has brought us to an unprecedented reality all over the world. Now, as an individual citizen, we are accustomed to wearing face masks and keeping social distance. These days, traveling to overseas is becoming something that we are dream about, as international travel is still restricted. In this situation, working on a travel bubbles would be very meaningful for people in business and also for public. I have about 6 topics, and my first one is about the qualification for the member of AAR. With regards to the collaboration in Pacific Asia, you mentioned about the building multinational team for after action review. I would like to talk more about the member of AAR teams. The role of AAR is objective observation for actual implementation of action that is supposed to be taken. Then it would be something very important to define qualification for the members of AAR. Discussion for the qualification of AARs would be very important step to know who is the right person to observe and audit fairly for the status of implementations. Once this qualification is defined, then we would know who is the right person to be the member of AAR. Second is about the public consent. I have seen the AAR planning and roadmap. It has a pace starting from design, prepare, conduct, and research with following up. And I would like to discuss more about the first step, that is the design phase. It starts with the designing an AAR, then who would be the participant to design it? I guess it could be a member of AAR teams and some other stakeholders, but it needs to consider the voice of public. This travel bubble concept was first raised by Australia and New Zealand, and they have a mutual trust for each system and procedures. The complexity of travel bubble protocol may only apply to business travelers and foreign residents at the beginning stage. In this situation, there would have some concern from general public. We may need to know what is their concerning point and how do they think about the travel bubble. The person like me also has the concerns and afraid of lifting travel restrictions because it might increase the risk of virus resurgence. These kinds of public concerns should be heard. Hearing and discussion of public opinion would be something that captures more information to consider and reflect it into the action to be taken. Third is about the pace measure and communication with public. Based on your presentation, another important work of AAR team is analyzing of gaps, finding best practice, and contributing factors. I guess travel bubbles will be much more complex than we may have thought originally. And also, we would not open the border completely at once. For sure, we will gradually open the borders by pace to see the status. As an example, on June 18, 2020, the government of Japan announced a paced measure for resuming cross-border travel. It would be important to have defined framework of each phase with transparency. Through that information, general public would know that when this travel bubble would be something that they also take advantage of, and it will lead them to take closer monitoring the status of import transmissions. Therefore, I would like to discuss more about the concept of pace measures and timeline, and how it will be communicating with the public to let them have enough information. Next one is about the gap analysis between countries and alternative actions. The analysis of gap between countries is one of the most critical factors to monitor constantly. Any missing factors in one country, whereas conducting in other countries may jeopardize the progress of containing virus. However, the condition and status of some countries may not be able to take some kinds of actions. As you stated, this gap should be analyzed. Then how this gap could be reduced would be important, as well as how to find an alternative action needs to be taken if some action is not feasible in some country. As a professional facilitator, for me, these next two things are really important. It is about the clear information sharing and tackle misinformation. I found that misinformation is something important that we have fight off, and glad that we share the same view on this point. This position of non-transparency caused public outcry. As one of best practice of Korean government was transparency of information. The South Korean model is significant since it shows the word that transparent democratic approaches, including public participation in threat management of the cases, is successful in comparison to stricter measures. To mitigate the surge of COVID-19, we need to have agile, adaptive, transparent actions. Korean government runs costly lesson from the MERS fail of 2015. With that lesson learned, we got to know that we can maintain quality of life in open and free society without paying too much cost. In addition, citizens' active participation in social distancing, the rate of infections began to drop dramatically. These kinds of best practice and good cases information should be shared to benchmarks. Then travel bubble would be more sustainable. It may require regular discussion and meeting to bring out all the cases followed by the prioritized actions to be implemented step by step in other countries. This would be one of a good method to fight off misinformation also. I would like to know the method of fighting misinformation and how those good cases information is currently being shared and interact each other to improve our own measures. Very lastly, I'd like to talk about the local community involvement and elevation to government or global level. Like critical success factors in Taiwan, there would have diverse success factors depending on the condition and environment of each country. Some factors must have contributed hugely a local area, and this information definitely is something that we have to share together for benchmarking and make equivalent level of conditions for travel bubble. I would like to emphasize those small contributor and effort in community level also something worth to hear. This discussion and talk could be held in local community basis. Any good practice that is worth of spreading should be reviewed and studied to improve AAL framework. Then how we can make community level to be involved more to the discussion and information sharing, and how to elevate these voices to government or global level. That's all. Thanks for having me in this important discussion. I greatly appreciate being able to speak about these issues. And I firmly believe this step and effort will highly contribute to Pacific Asia collaboration in Travel Bubble Alliance. Thanks again for the opportunity to be the part of that. Thank you very much.
Final presentation in this session will be held by Silal Bayari, Academic Associate, China Studies Center, University of Sydney. His presentation topic is Industrialized Nations Policy Options in the Age of COVID-19. And Antonio Garzon, Rector at the LUM Giuseppe Dinario University, will discuss this presentation.
Hello, this is a presentation on responses to COVID-19, possible options for cooperation, and the government investment perspective. Hello, I'll be presenting several aspects of the stated topic. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on the global economy, which has been suffering a recession. Export-oriented economies suffered much due to the decline in consumer markets. Nations are now concentrating on their health, well-being, and labor market participation. Governments have increased spending and started to borrow at high levels to deal with the new economic environment. We are now in a major Keynesian government spending period, and auspiciously, the cost of borrowing is projected to remain low for a long time. Again, fortunately, governments have now more opportunities to spend domestically. This is creating opportunities for increased cooperation, for nations to share their experiences in the fields of medical treatments and new health measures to cope with the crisis. Healthcare spending is the new major area due to pandemic cases and the pressure on the entire health system and health professionals. Government healthcare spending levels will continue to increase to deal with the pandemic and the post-pandemic healthcare costs. Domestically produced low-tech and high-tech items such as masks, ventilators, and testing kits can form a new production sector. Without personal protective equipment, it's not possible to continue to deal with the pandemic. There can be more cooperation between the nations to deal with the shortfalls on this matter. For this purpose, regional and even bilateral cooperation arrangements can be established. These arrangements may prove significant, especially for nations that are in close bilateral or regional economic relationships, and they can contribute to the creation of the so-called travel bubbles and more, and this would be subject to agreed conditions. Governments can now spend more on new IT systems for better national infrastructure for a wider range of applications in the healthcare sector. This can create more opportunities for international cooperation and sharing of medical information and real-time interactions and data sharing. It is important for the nations to share their experiences on the pandemic control measures in urban and rural settings, in work and leisure environments. Densely urbanized nations are creating new work rules, regulations, a new division of labor, managerial systems for working from home to avoid crowded offices and rush hour public transport. Some of these measures can be applied in other nations to avoid the worst effects of the pandemic. Governments can increase welfare spending to support individuals and families by providing a universal minimum non-market wage to underwrite consumption levels and increase labor market productivity in order to combat the current recession. Part of this spending should include a range of subsidies for families and single parents. Education systems can be partially reorganized to respond to the crisis and create a social learning environment to deal with the effects of the pandemic and the post-pandemic world. It is clear that the global supply chains will suffer for some time and may not come back online fully. Nations can benefit from each other's experiences in establishing new domestic production of health supplies, equipment, and pharmaceuticals. New regional and even bilateral supply chains can be established to reduce the response time to the effects of the pandemic. Such measures can benefit the types of international travel that nations have come to rely on and cannot do without. Overall, the healthcare systems of all nations need to support each other to build the post-pandemic world through sharing of information on treatment methods, progress, and outcomes. Finally, nations of this world need to set up specific government ministries of experts, at least for a 5-year period, to avoid similar pandemic crises in the future. A network of such ministries would be in constant touch for rapid response and acting on available data. Such a network could collectively make resolutions for regional travel and other restrictions to come into effect with the available information. Global alert and response time frame proved arguably difficult in this instance, as we know. Regional responses may well be more rapid. Following the presentation of above points, it is possible to argue that it is likely that the world can deal with future scenarios in a more organized and rapid fashion in the future. The sharing, update, and discussion of the crucial information may have formed the weakest point at the start of the present crisis. The second weakest point was probably the insufficient amount of government investment in public health systems and health professionals for the past several decades. This issue is still causing intense and unrelenting burden on the hospitals and all health professionals. The third weakest point concerns the nature of global supply chains. The lack of domestic production systems and capacity for the simplest personal protection equipment, such as masks, was a common problem. This type of production should not be a part of global supply chains in the future. The fourth weakest point is again linked to domestic production of technology, such as ventilators, the lack of which still affects many nations. Manufacturing of this type of technology also needs to be domestic in the future. The most crucial issue in this context was the lack of capability of the world collectively in understanding the necessity of continuous vaccine research. In nations with private sector-driven economies, there are major private corporations in the medical research and production sectors. It is crucial for governments to maintain a strong level of partnership with these companies. The importance of this type of government investment cannot be underestimated, as the loss of life, decline of the quality of life, and economic costs of this pandemic have all affected the existing healthcare system and the society. This has led to issues that extend into all segments of life. Governments need to be a bigger part of the cost of medical research in the future. The regulated health sectors, low government spending, and leaving the management to international organizations have not been sufficient. The present crisis came about because of several primary factors. Government's lack of sufficient interest in medical funding in the last several decades. Government's over-reliance on international bodies. Government's lack of interest in domestic production capabilities for crucial industries. Government's lack of dynamism in the very early phase of the crisis. And government's slow response to the crisis that emerged from these factors. Once we fully grasp the significance of these factors, then we can get ready for our future. We need to benefit from learning the specifics of each nation's story from here on. we need to focus on our well-being, social responsibilities, and responsibilities toward the world. Once the crisis is over, we need to sidestep the same shortcomings, remain optimistic, but sensible.
Antonello Garzoni, I'm professor of strategic management and I'm serving as a rector at Università LUM Giuseppe De Gennaro in Bari, Italy. I thank Professor Eun Kyung Lee for this kind invitation to the Asiatic Research Institute of Korea in order to speak about the Italian case, about the pandemic emergency we had in all the 2020, according to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency. So, what's the Italian case? Let me share with you a presentation in which startly identify the typical blocks in which we experience as a case of recovery in Italy. It was a successful experience, although the tragedy in which we had the problem during this year. The summary of my presentation will be by speaking according to the worldwide and Italian COVID-19 timeline, then going through the effects of the coronavirus pandemic on the global economic scenario, then starting with social and economic aspects of Italians during the quarantine, and in the end of this presentation by identifying how the Italian industry has reacted to the crisis and how we can think about new strategies to recover the crisis. But just recap the first part of the timeline according to COVID-19. It started in December 2019 in China, in Wuhan. But in Italy, the main effect started in February 2020, when the first case of COVID-19 was detected in Lombardy, in Codogno. In a few days, 11 red zones in terms of municipalities were blocked and locked down in Lombardy in order to start reacting to this emergency. But after a while, in March, our Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, started announcing a total lockdown, a national lockdown throughout Italy. And the crisis moved from the real economy to the financial economy. We experienced a negative decline of almost 17% in our index in the stock exchange, the MIB, which is the worst in our history. So we experienced a real period in which in total this lockdown, everything was blocked. But the Italian government started to inject liquidity in the companies, and in April 2020 we started with what we call the phase 2. That means starting recovery by gradual injecting trust and liquidity in all the system. What was the social and economic aspects of Italians who were in quarantine? I think it was the sense of urgency, the sense of emergencies. We can say a pride of being Italian, and as we normally act with some kinds of entrepreneurship and the desire of doing things with a certain sense of nationality, then a pride of trying to recover this disaster emerged during all the period. So there were a lot of slogans like "Ce la faremo," that means we can do it, or "Andrà tutto bene," that means everything will be fine. And this social experience also moved to the Balkans. In which people started to try to recover and to be part of this national identity. Also, the social distances imposes on workers and students, and we started with the adoption in all the universities and schools, the remote and smart working forms. But of course, all the difficulty that we had was in the hospitals, in the health systems, and also with the use of even the military and the army in order to block and force some kinds of respect of the quarantine. I remember during the Easter a totally blocked Italy and an empty Piazza San Pietro, where Pope Francesco prayed for humanity and reflecting on this pandemic experience. It was very important for us to start thinking with a certain sense of national identity, and this started also a way by which we tried to relaunch, to start again, and the phase 2 in May 2020 started with a lot of interventions of the government that acted very well in thinking about job, family, industry, the tourism, the mobility, so the transportation and all the restructuring. And what happened and what was the effect of all this? In Italy, probably we will end 2020 with a reduction of the GDP of almost 11%. But the recovery expected in 2021 is according to 5.4, 6 points up. That means that probably there will be a recovery based on what? Based on this kind of intervention, which even if almost the 70% of the companies remained blocked for a long period, and this was mainly in some kinds of industries in which probably everything was closed, like, for example, all the constructions were blocked, the trade suffered a little bit, but not so much. But even all the investment goods, all the activities in other services were totally blocked, and the overall economy was very in a difficult place. Then probably this kind of identity started by reaction and thinking that even the activity was overall for a small and medium enterprise to big enterprise, and this kind of activity was a real disaster for us. But which are the attitude of the Italians? We can come back to the Latins, to the Romans, where this word that is resalio. Resalio means bouncing back on something, and the resilience of a company is the ability to adapt, resist, and recover from external shocks. So the Italians were very resilient in this case, and probably we are very good in manage emergencies, as this is kind of our attitude. And right now we are thinking again for how we can organize for the return to the normality, and how we can imagine a new normality. Just to think about the strategies to recover, of course, Right now, we are acting in the phase 3, and the phase 3 is protecting employees and all the people that are working with us with all the masks and all the DPI that were something in which we need probably a real attention to the employees, but also to reassure our customers and to open again our places in order to start again with this new normality. And what we can say about the new normality? We can imagine that in this kind of strategies to recover, probably a big help was given by the wages supplementation fund or similar that was given to the companies in order to stay, to resist in this period and to give the people the normality to stay at home without having any problem according to the wages and all the difficulties that they could have in a crisis. But of course, right now we are thinking about a new normality. And what's the next normal for us? The next normal would be probably thinking about new business model, new consumer models, new organizational models, and new political probably scenarios that are happening right now in this period of recovery, and why not new economic scenarios. So we think in a very positive way for the future, as probably the experience that we had right now helped us in thinking how we can bounce back from this external shock and think again to the growth. So I know that the time was limited for this presentation, so I thank again Professor Eun-Kyung Lee for the invitation and Professor Soon-Jo Park from the Free Berlin University for inviting me to this conference, and thanks again, and a big chance for everyone for recovering this difficulty during the pandemic experience.